Hello and welcome to Dave's Arcade. Today I'm going over LED displays from Pinball Solutions. If you've ever had some older 80s games where the displays are gassing out or just don't work right anymore, well, they're high power displays and eventually they will gas out and they will have some problems. So the only way that you can get them, you can either try to repair them or find replacements, but these are much harder to find because the only way you're going to get them is if somebody's parting out a game, and maybe you can find one or two good ones. So a better solution is to go to Pinball Solutions and get some brand new LED displays. They come in a DIY kit that is super easy to put together, and it's going to eliminate all of those issues and you'll have bright, clear displays again. He offers these in amber, blue, and white versions, as well as generic aspect ratio and original aspect ratio. So here you can see a Farfalla that has the gas displays are gassing out. There's really no fixing this other than replacing them. And here's an example of the generic aspect ratio in amber used on this Pinball Champ. And here is original aspect ratio used on this Stern Stargazer. As I said, these come in a DIY kit. You can get the option of having Pinball Solutions build these for you, but I'm going to show you exactly how easy it is to put these together. So it's going to come in a shipping box. It'll come with a set of instructions and just lay everything out so you take an inventory of what you have. You won't need the foam pieces until the very end. So all your digit displays, just go with those. All the circuit boards for your components. I have a bunch of chips and a bag of various components. I've done a few of these kits before, so I found it easiest to get a little assembly line going for each one. So I'm going to separate this into two parts. So you'll do the display top portion first, and then we'll do the component side for all your chips and resistors in that second. So let's separate the two pieces, and we'll start with the LED displays. So first, let's take the components out of the bag, and we're going to separate the pieces out for the LED displays and the component bottom circuit boards. So I know that it's going to be these digit displays, and it's also going to be these angled connectors. So I'm going to separate out all the other pieces and put these with the component side over here. One thing that I think would be nice is if Pinball Solutions would kind of separate these out, but it's not a big deal. Just kind of sort through and put all the like pieces together so you can find them. Okay, the first step is to put the connectors on first. You just follow the instructions here. So it says to solder the 7-pin connector, right angle connectors to C1, 2, and 3. This will be slightly different if you're doing a Bally or Stern display. This is for Zaccaria, so the connections are a little bit different, but essentially it's very similar. So it does say to solder, there's two different connection points for this connector, and he says the higher row is for ones with the front facing plastic, so that's what this is, meaning this is a cut to length connector, and so I'm going to be using the higher row of the two in this case. So just put this inside the connections here, and then we'll do that for all three of them, get them in place. Now, another thing that I like to do to hold the components in place, just take a piece of tape, put it over the components that you just put in, stick it down. This is just to hold it temporarily so you can flip it over and solder it. Just go ahead and add some solder to each pin. I like to lock in the ends first to make sure that these are good and they are square. So what I'll do is I'll get this locked in on these two end pins first, and then I'll go on the other side and make sure that these are nice and flush. If they are not flush, all you have to do is just hold it with your finger on one side, and then you can heat up the solder pad to push them so they are flush with each side. So just make sure you check that on all three. Okay, and now you don't need the tape anymore. Just set that off to the side. We can use that later. And then you just go through and solder the rest of the pins. Now you can flip it back over and we can start adding in the LED digits. One thing about these is you need to take a look at the pins because they need to be straight. If they're not, then you need to straighten them out. Otherwise you're going to have a tough time getting them placed into the holes. And so just do this one by one, adding them to their slots, making sure that the comma is going towards the bottom. Now I find it easiest to, you can either take it from the edge of the table or just flip them over and hold it. So you can flip them all at the same time, and now you are working on a flat surface and you can solder them all into place. Now that that's complete, take some alcohol and a toothbrush and you can clean up all the flux that was left behind during the soldering process. And this will give you a much cleaner looking professional job. Just wipe it off with a rag. And there you have it. It's much cleaner looking. And now, if I was going to, like I said, I would be doing each one of these in an assembly line and just do all the displays all at once. So it's just sort of a repetitive motion. So now I'm actually going to move on to the component side bottom board and go through that. First, let's separate all the components into their individual parts, so we can take an inventory of everything that we have. As I said before, I think it would be a little nicer if Pinball Solutions put these in little bags so you didn't have to do this, but it's okay. You just match up all the things. You don't really need to, they all kind of put all the like items together. Make sure that you have enough for your 5 displays that you'll be making in your kit. So now that we have everything separated, let's refer back to the instructions. So first it says to solder all the small components, so your resistors, diodes, and your regulator 1117, which is IC6. So let's go ahead and do those. So everything is already marked on the board for you. And so you just need to match up each one. So you have So we can start with, here's IC6, which is this surface mounted piece. Tape. Since this is surface mounted, I'm going to start with this first and get that out of the way. Just line it up on the pads and solder it in place. So all the resistors and diodes, they're all listed on the board in the screen printing, and then you can refer to the sheet that comes with the instructions to follow where these go. So we can do, let's do R1 through R8, and that is resistor 47 ohms. So just find the 47 ohm resistors, which is this big line here, and you're going to take off 8. Now what I like to do is to support the PCB, and then you can insert the components. So we can actually use these foam blocks that they have in the kit, and you can just set your PCB so it's supported on the sides, and then just take your components and just one at a time bend the legs down, and then you can insert them into the board. Now, just as I did before, I'll push the components all the way down, and then you can use a piece of tape, hold it in place, and then flip the board over, and then go ahead and solder your components in. If you want to see the tools that I'm using in this video, check out my top 10 tool list at the link in the top corner. I find it helpful to have a waste paper basket on underside of your table, and then you can just scrape the leads off into your garbage. Alright, now we'll move on to the next components. So we'll start with next we'll move on to the other resistors. So we have a single resistor for R9, 10, and 11. And so I'm going to pull off each one. So I have R9 is 1K, R10 is 150 ohm, and then R11 is 10K. So R9, I believe this is 1K. It is difficult for me to read the handwriting there. And then I have, looks like a 10K and then 150. If you're unsure, you can take your multimeter and measure the resistance on these first. For example, if I'm looking for the 1K, I would set it on 20K, so it'll measure 20 or less, and then I can just put my leads on there, and this is the 1K. And so then the 10K would be this one, and that's 10 point something, that's the 10K, and then I have 150 ohm, and so that would be this one. And that's what those are. Okay, so first the R9 is the 1K resistor, so we'll pull off one of those. And R9 is right here. Insert. R10 is the 150 ohm resistor, and that is right here. And then R11 is the 10K resistor. Which is right here. So another way that you can hold the components in place rather than the piece of tape is you can spread out the component with your fingers so it's wider than the holes that they were inserted into, and then they won't fall out the bottom. So now just flip it over and solder them in place. And again, take your flush cut snips and take off the leads. And then clear your work area. Okay, so now we're on to we can move on to the diodes. So diode D1 is 1N4004. And since there's one of these, so I know that's going to be this set of 5. So just take one out of there. And look for D1 on the board. And here is D1. Make sure that you have the banded side of the diode going in the same direction as the screen printing on the board. Now I can do D2 and 6 is 1N 41, 48. So 2 and 6. Grab 2 of these, bend them, and they also have a banded side. So you're going to do oops. My mistake. It's D2 to D6. So D2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then, so this is D2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Or 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so the banded side going up on these 4. And then the banded side going down on D4. And just push these in all the way, and it should hold them. And then you can flip it over and solder them in place. Again, take your flush cut snips and cut off all the leads. Alright, now we've finished with all of the resistors and diodes. So the next step is to install all the IC chips. Make sure that you put them in the correct position. All of the IC chips have a notched end, so you put them in the right spot. So let's just match all these up. And they're screen printed on the board, so I just need to grab one of each. So this one is a 4028. So 4028 is IC3. One thing I like to do with ICs is to make it so you can put them in the holes easier. Just set them on the flat surface and then just rock the whole thing to the center, and that will straighten them all out at once. And so again, this 4028N. Now at this point, if you have sockets, you can do that. They do not provide sockets for these, but I don't plan on removing these at any time, so I'm just going to solder them directly to the board. Just lock them in place for now. I'll place all the rest of the ICs. So let's grab another one. Next one up is TBD 62083, and that is IC5. So again, rock these legs over just a little bit to straighten them out, make it easier to insert. Match up the notched end and insert it into the board. Next one is 4511, and so again, same process, and that is IC1. Next is CD 4042, and that is IC2. Put that in place. This one does not have a notched end, but it does have a dot in the bottom corner. So just match that up. That is your notch. And the last one is IC4 TD62783. Put that in place. Alright, now that I have them all inserted, I'm going to go through and solder all the rest of the legs. Then just go through and double check your work. Make sure that you got everything. Like I missed one right here. That looks good. Okay. Next it says to solder on the potentiometer. So you have two different positions for the displays, so you can actually put them into here's the rear or the front. So I'm actually just going to pick the rear, and you just line up the legs, snap it in place, and then solder it in. Next step, it says install and solder the capacitors. Capacitors on the list are with C, so C1 is a 22 UF polarized capacitor, so that would be this electrolytic one, and the positive leg is always the longest leg, or you'd see marking on the capacitor itself, there'd be a stripe for the negative. So that's going into C1, which is right here, and you can see on the board that it notes the negative and positive. So negative going towards the bottom in this case. Or I mean positive going to the bottom, excuse me. And then we'll just solder that in place. And snip off the leads. Okay, now we have all of these smaller metal film capacitors, so that would be C2, 3, and 4, the ceramic ones. So C2, C3, and C4. Just push those in tight and they'll hold them in place. Next step is to install the dip switches and the network resistors. So In this case, this would be your dip switches. So you need one of these. So I'll install this so the on is going towards the top side like this. And in this case, I think I'll use my piece of tape again, hold that in place, flip it over, and solder in place. Now the SIP resistors, that is the 10K network resistors, and what you'll do for these is the dot, there's a dot on one end of the resistor, so that follows with, so the dot would be going to the left in this case. So you place both of these in that same orientation. And again, I'll take my tape and put it in place over these SIP resistors, flip it over, and solder in place. The next step, it says to install the IDC20 header connector, which would be where your ribbon cable connects for the Zaccaria displays. And it says to remove pin 19, but it looks like that is already done for me. So the reason is just so you reduce the risk of it contacting the 170 volts for the high power, which you don't need anymore because these are LED displays. So you'll just insert this into CN4. So it's a little bent. In this case, I'll set this down so it's flat, and then just solder it in place. Now the next step is to install CN1, 2, and 3 headers. So they, and it says to make sure that you align them straight. So essentially, like I've been showing you all along, use a piece of tape to hold it in place so it's square with the board. Actually, I'm going to go this other way. Hold it tight and flat to the board, and then you can solder it in place. And again, if you want to make sure that it's super flat to the board, you can, after you've locked in those end pins, you can hold it with your thumb on one side and heat it up, and then push it all the way so it's nice and flat. So the piece of tape worked in that case. So again, take your other two for CN 1, 2, and 3 here. Line them up. Check, this one has a bent leg, so make sure you straighten that out. Insert. Take the piece of tape, hold it in place. We'll lock in pins on both sides. You can remove the tape, make sure it's nice and flat against the board. You can heat it up and hold it. Now just go ahead and solder all the rest of the legs. Now I just go through it and make sure that I've populated everything, and I can already see that I missed a dip switch for the lamp test in the right hand corner here. Well, it seems that I did not miss it in the instructions because it's not there. So this lamp test dip switch, that goes in this corner. So all I'm doing is just match up the legs, and there's really only one way that it can go. So it's just a momentary push button switch. So just push that into place and then solder the legs. Okay, now that you've checked everything, make sure you double check your components list, look on the board, make sure that you've gotten everything soldered in. It's all on the screen printing. Obviously you only have one, in this case one potentiometer for the brightness, as we've talked about before. And lastly, we're going to clean this up again using some alcohol and a toothbrush. Scrub the whole board, get all that flux off of there. It's going to look like a much more professional job. Alright, now that that's all cleaned off, so the dip switches on Zaccaria games, you need to set the dip switch to whichever display is being used. So in this case, if it was player 1, you turn that on and then you leave all the rest off. So make sure that you get that set. And then also, when you plug these in, make sure that you set the potentiometer brightness until you can see the display, and just set it to whatever you want so they're all the same. Now we'll take the LED board, the two halves, and we can put them together. And there we have it, a finished Pinball Solutions LED display. When you do go to pinballsolutions.eu, check out the Zaccaria or Bally Stern Bell Games LED display DIY kits. If you enter Dave's Arcade at checkout, you can get a little discount, and it also lets them know that you saw this video and it directed you to them. So thank you for watching.